Hi guys, and I am back. This is Joyce. Joyce knows who done it. I have another, a mystery for you, but really it's not so much a mystery, but looking into an accidental death. Maybe it was suicide. We're talking about the late great Dorothy Dandridge. Let me just first say that Dorothy Dandridge was one of the most beautiful actresses of the time. Even Marilyn Monroe back in the day thought that Dorothy was just impeccably beautiful, and she wished that she looked like Dorothy Dandridge. That tells you how beautiful Dorothy was. Dorothy was born on November 9th, 1922. Um, she was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and she had one mom, her mother Ruby. Ruby was an inspiring entertainer, wanted to be an actress. Ruby Dandridge was very well known herself. Her mother, she played different maids and on television shows and in movies. Um, and then her father was Cyril Dandridge, and Cyril was not into entertainment. He was a cabinet maker and actually a Baptist preacher. Prior to her birth, her parents separated, so she didn't have that kind of relationship that a lot of people do with both parents in the house. When the girls got a little bit older, Ruby actually created a song and dance act for Ruby and her sister Vivian, and they were called the Wonder Children. Their act was actually managed by Ruby Dandridge's lover. She had a lover, a female lover by the name of Geneva Williams. Now, Williams, it is said, was especially bad-tempered and very cruel to the children, very heavy disciplinarian. There was nothing really, it seemed as though that they could do right. And she continuously punished them or gave them corporal punishments. Um, the sisters, though, began to tour around the United States in the South, in which they used to call the Chitlin Circuit, where they would go into areas that allow black entertainment or black customers, and they were in the South. They did that for almost 5 years as children, um, without really ever attending school. They traveled for 5 years. While their mom, Ruby, she stayed home and she worked in Cleveland as a performer. Now, during the Great Depression, work in Cleveland was basically dried up, and actually the chitlin circuit had kind of dried up at that point too. People just didn't have the money for that. So Ruby took a chance and decided to move to Hollywood, California. And there she was able to actually find steady work on the radio and in film. And she would play these small roles in films where she was a maid. Um, and the girls ended up relocating to Hollywood as well, where Dorothy went to the McKinley Junior High School. Um, After some time, the Wonder Children, which is what Dorothy and her sister Vivian's name they renamed them to the Dandridge Sisters in 1934. And at that point, they teamed up with an additional artist by the name of Etta Jones, and they did dancing and singing. Um, they actually continued to work for many years, and they were actually booked in really high profile clubs like the Cotton Club. Now, the Cotton Club, I'm sure you know, is where the black entertainers, dancers, musicians performed, and yet black people could not attend. They couldn't sit there and watch the shows. They had to come in through the back or through the kitchen. They also worked at the Apollo Theater, which I've actually been there in Harlem. Um, Dorothy's actually first on-screen appearance was a small part in Our Gang. If you remember the Our Gang with Spanky and Alfalfa, and just a little comedy short. Um, the sisters themselves also appeared in the big broadcast in 1936 with Bill Bojangles Robinson, who was a very big artist at that time with singing and his amazing tap dancing, which you may remember him tap dancing up the steps with Shirley Temple. Then she did A Day at the Races. That was with the Marx. In those days, the blacks and whites didn't usually play together unless a black person was playing a servant of some sort, a domestic. And in this case, it was with a black people, and it was a race film, all black, and they cast her as a murderer. But it didn't do much for her career because it wasn't that big of a part. Um, and then another thing, she really was unique in the sense that she really rejected any type of stereotypical black roles like maids and servants and things like that. And with her rejecting those types of roles, it really kind of limited her choices of things that she could do. And she was in one movie where Dorothy actually did a specialty dance number with the Nicholas brothers, and it was the Chattanooga Choo Choo dance where the Nicholas brothers danced with her, and they actually where they each slid down steps and they danced, and they did that for the 20th Century Fox. After time, those little roles started to dry up for her, and she started touring around in places like the Macambo and things like that, where she would actually sing and perform just so that she's able to make the ends meet. And at one of these performances in December 1952, MGM studio agent saw Dorothy. His name was Dory Sherry, and he had her appear in a role called Remains to be Seen. That was already in production, so he had her go in there. But then he also had her cast in another role where she had a starring role along with Harry Belafonte called Bright Road, and that was her first real starring role. And she was very wonderful and very emotional, and that opened opportunity to her for greater things. Then in 1953, 20th Century Fox, they did a nationwide search for someone to cast in an all-black musical. And it was a film that was adapted by Oscar Hammerstein's the, the second's 1943 Broadway musical Carmen Jones. They looked all over for someone to be the perfect um, Carmen, and they couldn't find anyone. Then someone had suggested to the director, who at that time was Otto Preminger, that he should see this movie, Bright Road, with Dorothy Dandridge in it. He said, okay, I'll see her, and had her come down so he could see if he would consider her. And he saw her play this role where she was all buttoned up because in Bright Road she plays a school teacher, and her hair was pulled back. And he thought, no, she can't be Carmen. She could play Cindy Lou. Cindy Lou is another part, kind of buttoned up, uptight lady in the film Carmen. He considered her for that. And he even screen tested her for that. But she did not want that role. She wanted to play Carmen. So what she did was she went to Max Factor, who was at that time and still does have a museum in Hollywood. And he had Max Factor dial her up with a wig on and full face makeup and a sexy outfit. And so she went back. She wanted to look more earthy, something that Otto Preminger was looking for. And she walked into a meeting that he was having, and she was walking around the meeting table, and she was switching and moving around, and Otto Preminger gave her the role. And the remainder of the cast was Harry Belafonte once again. Pearl Bailey was in Carmen, Brock Peters, Diane Carroll, um, Olga James, and Joe Adams. And even though Dorothy was renowned for having a beautiful singing voice, they did not use her voice. They used the vocals of a operatic singer by the name of Marilyn Horne, so that the voice just sounded that much better and more like opera. Now, the film did very well. On the first opening on October 28th, 1954, it made $70,000, which that is a lot of money in these days. And then during that first week, it made an additional $50,000 and just continued to grow. Now it's kind of a cult classic. It still is on. But that particular film made Dorothy like a true sex symbol in Hollywood. And she became one of these people that was really requested to be in different films. In fact, Dorothy was even nominated for an Academy Award for her part as Carmen. Now, she was the first African American woman or period to be nominated for the starring role in a film. Um, but she didn't win it, but the fact that she was nominated was fantastic. Now, she signed on February 15th, 1955, she signed a three-movie deal with 20th Century Fox, and she was going to be earning $75,000 a film. And she saw the films and it just was not right. It was more of the same type of Carmen Jones film, and she just wasn't interested in doing those types of films. Not to mention the fact she had begun a relationship with Otto Preminger, the director of Carmen. Now, Otto Preminger was nothing nice, okay? On the set, he would be so harsh to Dorothy, so condescending to the other actors, very belligerent, and yet she was in this relationship with him because I think that she felt this, where is this going to go to? So when 20th Century Fox offered her this deal and she talked to Otto about the roles that they were giving her, he told her, no, you're an international star. You don't have to take those downgraded roles anymore. And so she turned those different roles down, and those roles end up going actually to Rita Moreno. Um, Now, another great role that she played in, along with Otto Preminger. Now, at this time, the two had gone their separate ways, and it was Otto was married. Let me just say this, but it was a bad breakup. He couldn't commit to her. He wasn't going to divorce his wife. He wasn't going to marry a black woman. And so she was fine. She broke the relationship off. But he wasn't fine. And they did the movie Porgy and Bess together. And that was with Sammy Davis Jr. and Sidney Poitier. But Otto Preminger just berated and bullied her and beat her down to where she was in tears most of the time. So much so that at one point, even Sidney Poitier jumped into it and was ready to beat up Otto Preminger right on the set, had it not been for Sammy Davis Jr. Pulling him off of him. And just the way that he treated her was really terrible. Now, Dorothy was a Democrat, and she supported Alday Stevenson, Adlai Stevenson during the 1952 presidential election. She also had several relationships. When she first was married, she married Harold. Now, in one of her times at the Cotton Club, when she was doing the Chattanooga Choo Choo, as I said, she was dancing with the Nicholas brothers, and they were just fantastic tap dancers, acrobatic dancers, and she ended up spotting Harold Nicholas, or actually he spotted her. They started a relationship, and it was long distance for a while because the Nicholas brothers had to travel. But ultimately, September 6, 1942, they were married. Shortly after that, it ended up that Dorothy got pregnant with a baby. Now, this marriage was a very unhappy marriage, and it really deteriorated because Nicholas was a really big womanizer, and he wasn't there, really being as attentive as he could. In fact, by 1948, Nicholas had abandoned his wife, and his child. And in fact, on the day that she was going to give birth to their daughter, Carolyn, Dorothy wanted Harold to be there to take her to the hospital. But Harold had left Dorothy, in the care of his sister-in-law, Fayard's wife. And the baby was coming, but Dorothy would not call an ambulance. She waited and waited and waited so long that by the time Harold came back, he went golfing, even though he knew she was in labor. By the time he came back, it was so time ready to give birth, but the baby had gotten stuck and they had to use forceps to get the baby out, which caused her to have terrible brain damage. And pretty much after that, Harold was done with the relationship. He couldn't really get as excited or into the fact that, number one, it was a girl, number two, she was brain damaged, that Dorothy was doting on her more than she was doting on Harold. Harold wasn't paying any attention to any of it. It was just sort of like Dorothy's problem. Ultimately, Dorothy had to, she had some friends taking care of her because she had to go back and work since her and her husband were divorced. But ultimately, Dorothy's money began to run low, and she had to finally realize that she had to put heroin into a state institution. This was devastating for Dorothy. This is not something she had to wanted to do, but she just had no choice, and she was so busy blaming herself. Um, then she ended up marrying uh, Jack Dennison, and that was June 22nd, 1959, and that was after her Otto Preminger relationship. But she married this guy, but they divorced in 1962 because Jack Dennison was very abusive. He used to beat her, berate her, um, he actually was stealing her money. She had no idea he was swindling her money. He started trying to manage her or take care of her. But then Dorothy discovered that he had swindled her out of $150,000. And she had also owed at that time $139,000 in back taxes. So she ended up being forced to sell her Hollywood home. And then that's when she placed her daughter into mental institution in Camarillo State Hospital. Now, on September 8th, 1965, on the day that Dorothy died, Dorothy was on the phone with her now ex-sister-in-law, Geraldine Jerry Branton. That was Fayard's wife. And they talked for quite a long time. Now, Jerry says that Dorothy had a flight scheduled to New York the first day, and she was preparing for her nightclub engagement at the Basin East Street East. Um, Bratton had told biographers that during their long conversation, Dorothy was veering back and forth, expressing hope for the future. She was even singing Barbra Streisand's People, like the entire song. And then she gave a cryptic message to Jerry, and she says to Jerry, whatever happens, I know you'll understand. And that is what Dorothy said to Jerry, and that is her last known words. Well, several hours later, Dorothy's body was found naked and unresponsive in her apartment by her manager, Earl Mills. Earl was supposed to come by. They had an appointment to go over her performance for the next day in New York. He knocked on the door. He got very concerned. He broke the door in, only to go in the bathroom and find her laying on the floor. Now, the Los Angeles pathologists determined that the cause of death was an accidental overdose of the antidepressant, and I think I'm going to say this wrong, I'm not sure, imipramine, Imipramine. Also, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office concluded that she died of fat embolism. She had fractured her foot sometime before doing rehearsal for one of her performances, and some of the chips of the fat, they're saying, came in and caused a blood clot in her system. Well, on September 12th, 1965, they did have a private funeral service, and that was held at the Little Chapel of the Flowers. She was later cremated, and her ashes interred in the Freedom Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, and that is where she lays to this day. I wanted to take a little look at Dorothy because there's been some conspiracies. Some people say that it was suicide, not an accident, that she planned that because of her cryptic message. Other people say that because she was very active in the civil rights movement and working with the NAACP, that she was murdered, uh, beaten and strangled in her bathroom. And then some say it was an accident. So I want to see what really happened. So Dorothy's birthday is November 9th, 1922, and at 10:35 p.m. in Cleveland, Ohio. So as I look at her birthday, that number 11 tells me that it was her and one other. And she did. She had one sister. That 1 and 1 tells me there was her and one other. And 11 also tells me that she had a lot of hard lessons in her life, that 11 is a master number. And with that being said, Her father deserted them. Her and her parents broke up. Her mother was having a full-on love affair in front of the little girls' faces, her and her sister, with another woman. The other woman was abusive to them and beat them on a regular, and the other woman actually acted like as if she was a man. Over-exaggerated manly behavior. Dorothy spent 5 years of her youth on the road down south in the Chitlin Circuit making money for the household. She was separated from her mother, so you can imagine how devastating that is. That's almost like the death of your parent. Um, she married Harold Nicholas very young in her 20s, and that's that number 11 that says that that was a very hard marriage. She saw the death of that marriage happen where she was a young girl in love and he was a womanizer. That was devastating to her, as well as her daughter being born, and her daughter being born mentally ill. Another devastation for Dorothy. Then she has her Saturn return, and then she's got the number 9, and that says, oh, okay, I see. This is when she's in her 30s. She was very active in civil rights, in different black activist groups with the NAACP, with Martin Luther King, and speaking out against injustice and speaking up for equality and making public appearances on those things. That number 9 says that having gone to the number 11 and then going into a number 9 says that I understand people. I understand hate, inequality, prejudice, racism. I get it. And she had this great, profound love for people, especially children, since her daughter she was not able to be a part of. Now, Dorothy's life path is a 7. And so I understand now why Otto Preminger said, don't take those movie roles. They were beneath you. Otto Preminger was a foreigner, and although he understood the Hollywood system and he understood racism and things like that, he couldn't he couldn't get past the fact that this lady was brilliant. This lady was a fantastic actress. This number 7 says that she had complete focus in her career and her craft, whether it was singing, her dancing, her acting. She was phenomenal. And that 7 says that she would have been in the arts. And that 7 says she would have been taking care of her body and stretching and doing whatever workouts they would do at that time. And she really dug deep into the research of acting and the best ways and the skills and the hows. So she was exceptional in that, and so he could see that and say, "Hey, you just come off of playing Carmen, the role of your life, and you want to go back and play something less than that." Um, that year, 1965, was a number 5 year for her. And actually, she never even got into it. It would have been a 5. It was September she died. It was November is her birthday. So she was kind of in the shadow of that. And that number 5 would have been a hard year for her anyways. That number 4 said that she had to be very structured and specific and detail oriented in what she did in her life. And it wasn't until that number 4 year in 1964 kicked her in to say, wait a minute, what's going on with my money? She had came out of a 3 year where she was enjoying life and living it up and having a good old time, and then she gets in a number 4 year and finds out that this guy has been swindling her and mishandling her funds. He, like I said, he took $150,000 from her, and she did not know. By the time she knew, it was gone. Um, but by she got that number 4 year, which is what she was in on the year she died, she would have seen that very clearly. This guy ripped her off. But you got to think about all the stack upon stack upon stack of hurt and disappointment was just extremely harsh for her. Her rising is in Leo, and I get that. Rising Leos are very attractive people, and they have um, great personalities, and people are drawn to them. It's like looking at the sun. And that was her, this beautiful look of the sun shining on her. Her beauty, her almost seeming like she was a little bit arrogant. She wasn't, but people take people that have that rising in that area. But she was very concerned of how she looked, and she wanted to look just right. She wanted to be in control of her career. She didn't want to play any domestic, so that would be Definitely part of there. Her sun is in Scorpio, so that means that she could be very intense with her emotions, either loving something or hating something. She could be vengeful. During the time that she was making Porgy and Bess, if Otto Preminger got too abusive towards her, she would shut down. Period. Not talk, not act, not do anything, and that was the way that she could get revenge back. She had a tendency to be brooding, like want to be by herself. She also had a moon in Cancer. So that tells me that that emotional place of water with water, moon, Cancer, it was exalted there, but at the same time, it still made her deeply hurt with criticism. That would hurt her deeply because that moon in Cancer says she gave a lot. She did a lot. She would be actually smothering to people. She'd be doing and giving so much, and to be told that she wasn't good enough really would have hurt her a lot. She has a Mars in Aquarius. And so that tells me right there, first of all, she likes groups and gatherings, but also she's a rebel with a cause. And that is why she was an activist and would speak up where a lot of black actors wouldn't. She didn't care. She would, because that Aquarius Mars would not allow her to be quiet. By the way, she's got a stellium in Scorpio, so she was very Scorpio. Three or more planets tells you that you're very much that sign. So she was very much um, looking into details and not being especially trusting of people, and that it took a while to build that trust, took a while to put those walls down for her. And if you hurt her, like Otto Preminger or like Dennison, her husband, her other husband, or Harold Nicholson, her first husband, you can imagine she was like damaged goods. She was damaged goods. She was a researcher and she would look into people. And then she got caught slipping with Dennison because he came across like, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to do anything. I'm the good guy. And that's the guy you always have to look out for. She had her North Node is in Virgo, but most of us work out of our South Node. And her South Node was Pisces. And that is very sad to say that her death was not an accident. Her death was a planned. Everything was coming down on Dorothy. Dorothy didn't accidentally take too many pills. Dorothy was too smart for that. Dorothy was not a drug abuser, okay? She took medication for mental or nervous or emotional matters, but not uh, opioids, okay? So she knew what she was doing, and she made a decision because she was going to the New York show. She was doing another engagement, and it was sort of like, I'm tired now. How many more engagements am I going to have to do? When will I ever be able to stop? I can't get back in the movies anymore. Um, I'm getting older. I'm losing my looks. And at that time, looks were everything, especially a Leo rising, looks were everything. I've had man after man cheat on me. I don't have custody of my daughter anymore. She's in a state institution. I've had my self-esteem beaten out of me by my mother's lover. I've seen strange, peculiar things that I never thought I would see, and she had enough. And that's what happened with Dorothy Dandridge. It wasn't an accident. That fat embolism probably was loose in her system, but that was the small part of it. That was just uh, not even the icing on the cake. Anyways, that's Dorothy Dandridge. Beautiful, beautiful lady who decided, I'm ready to go. With that Pisces in her south node, that's a fish going wrong, a fish going backwards. That's someone that's absorbing everything negative around her. She was not able to just shake it off. Being that she was so Scorpio and Cancer and Pisces, she was absorbing all of that, and she had had enough. Guys, this is Joyce Knows Who Done It. Please remember to subscribe, comment. Tell me if you remember Dorothy Dandridge. You guys have a great day. Bye now.